Explain how poetry plays a role in creating a better world for all.
Well, I think that art in general plays a role in creating a better world for everybody. There is this misconception on the meaning of the word value. We always think, society tends to think a lot in economic value of things and in the words like productivity. Like we have to make things that are only profitable, as if the only thing that we do is to buy things, to exchange objects. Poetry is very famously and very proudly the most non-capitalistic of arts. Making poetry is taking a stand against the idea that everything that is valuable is only profitable. And I am not saying that poetry is not profitable or not economically valuable, but what I'm saying is that its main value goes beyond that. This poetry is a form of communication. This is one of my poetic beliefs. It's a form of communication with ourselves, with others, and with transcendence at the same time. If one of these three forms of communication is not happening, then we don't have a poem. We have a cool essay, we can have a great speech, but it is only a poem when the unexplainable is in the center of the words. When our words take us and come from silence, then the poem is happening. And it makes a better world because it reminds us of how close we are from each other. Right now, it is not only money, but it's also the idea, this very radical individualism, where we want to have our own profile in social media and our own ringtone on our telephones, and everything has to be customized because we want to be unique. And even though uniqueness is important, it is also very important to never forget that we all feel the same hunger and the same strive for love, and we all are alone, and none of us is really sure of what happens after we die. Not to answer those questions, but to explore those mysteries, there is poetry. And asking those questions, putting in words what we normally cannot say with words, is making the world better, because it's reminding us that we are not only flesh and we are not only consumers, but we are also transcendental beings that have for a moment passed through this world. I don't think that we are living beings that then die. I think that we are transcendental things that have a moment of flesh. And to have that reconnection, to have that dialogue with transcendence is important. Poetry is always taking us to our origins. And our origins are not only where we come from and who we are, but it's the very deep origin of existence, is that transcendence, that first silence, that unexplainable thing where we all start and where we all end up. So I do think that poetry is making a better world, because it's putting words into our silence. And of course, there is the possibility of making political poetry. There is the possibility of protesting. There is the possibility of giving voice to those who don't have one, because poetry is always endless in its possibilities. It's also, for me, it is the place where I exercise my ultimate freedom. I am nowhere as free as I am in the poem. For everything else, I have to negotiate with something or with somebody. But the words in the poem are only a negotiation between silence and me. And and the truth, which I also believe that every human being needs at least one space where we can exercise absolute freedom. For me, it's poetry. For others, there will be other form of art or something else. But yes, poetry makes us realize that we are transcendental and that we all are transcendental. We see each other on each other.
What is the biggest message you share with the world through your work?
I don't know if I share one single message that is consistent in every poem. I think that I go from one thing to the other. There are a couple of messages that I believe that I'm always reiterating. I am obsessed, for example, with the subject of death because I love life. I believe, like for example, in this book is called The Parting Present, 3 words, because the present, our present time, is parting all the time, is leaving us. And we know for sure that at some point we will not be here, or someone or everything that we love will not be here. And that is why I believe in love as the one way that we should experience the world. And I know it sounds corny, but that's only because I am, unapologetically. I do believe in love as a transformative force. I do believe in love as a way of knowledge. And I believe that in the center of my poetry is the belief that every poem is a love poem, because I only talk about things that I love. I don't write poetry against anything. Even when I'm protesting, I am really highlighting all of the other things that I believe that should be highlighted. And time worries me. How everything is fading away worries me. Oblivion worries me. But the only way to confront that for me is putting things in paper so they stay. And outside of the page is expressing and giving and experiencing love in the most radical way possible. Because that intensity is the only intensity that is worth of life, I think. I also have said, and people have asked me, that I believe that it's important to tell everybody that their story is worth of literature. I have seen many young people telling me that they don't know what to write about because they don't think that their life is as interesting as the life of other writers that they read. Like, I am not living in Paris, and I am not traveling around the world, and or maybe I don't have enough problems, you know. But I believe that any human experience is a poetic experience if there is a poet talking about it. So, whatever is your story is important. Whatever is your part of the human experience is part of the history of art, if you are the artist that makes it. I also believe that I talk a lot about the connection between this world that we know full of objects and our flesh and that metaphysic reality that for me is evident. I believe that poetry for me is a bridge between them. Poetry, I write poetry in order to leave testimony of the glimpses that I sometimes have about whatever is beyond this. But those glimpses come from close observation of everything that is here. When I see the face of my daughter, I see eternity. And this is not a rhetoric figure. This is not a figure of speech. I do see eternity when I see the face of this baby, because I know that the love that I'm feeling for her is the love that the first parent felt when they saw the first baby. And I know that this form of love has to come and has to go somewhere that is beyond this. And the same happens when I hear certain music, or when I see certain works of art, or when I talk to other people. Everything that is beautiful is, for me, a reminder of the transcendence. And I do think that it's our responsibility as human beings to always respond with beauty. This is the last thing that I'm going to say. When reality is beautiful, we should respond with beauty, because it's the least that we can do. And when reality is terrible, we should respond with beauty, because it's the least that we can do. I think that beauty is always the answer.
How did your perception of the world change after you became a father?
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting question. That's one that I haven't been asked. The world changed when I became a father in many ways, in many stages, in many forms. One was the practical way. My time wasn't mine anymore. The time that I used to have and the energy that I used to have for writing and for reading and the silence in the house, all of those things stopped existing. The house was not quiet anymore. My studio was not my studio anymore. Now it was the baby room. My daughter evicted me from my own library. Then, months later, when I finally had the time or the energy to start writing again, I realized that I was writing now about her, and I was writing about us, and that my perception of myself and my perception of the world was changed forever. Because now, even when I wasn't talking about things that directly have to do with my daughter, like if I was making a poem about, I don't know, a war, or about the tree on the street or whatever, now this world is the world that is inhabited by my daughter. I couldn't be as cynical as I used to be anymore, because now I cared, and I want to change the world, because that is the world where my daughter lives. Now the good matters more than before. But being a person and being an artist, for me, are the same thing. So as an artist also, I believe that my tone changed. This book is the first book that I write in such clear and natural language. It's a book where I didn't think of it while I was making the poems, but now that I read the poems, I realize that I am trying to communicate very clearly and very directly with the reader. And for many of these poems, the reader is Olivia in the future. But since every poetic experience that is true transcends you and transcends your intentions, it is really a poem from any father to any son to any daughter. As a writer, I also became interested in who are the other artists that have been talking explicitly about them as parents, or who have been expressing the tribulations and the problems and the beauty of parenting, particularly fathers. And that led me to realize that the figure of the father it has a very bad rap in literature. The father is always in the voice of the son. Are the sons talking about the fathers? And that father is almost all the time the absent father, or the very troubling, very traumatic, very abusive father. A few times we have the father talking about his children, but it's usually as a form of apology, or after a tragedy happened, after the children died, or to say, I'm sorry that I wasn't there, or I'm sorry that I was terrible. And then there are very few, not enough to make a real big tradition, loving fathers that express their love in their literature. It's like the domestic, the body, and the love for the kids are not part of what men talk in literature usually. That is starting to change, I believe. I believe that the view on fatherhood and the view of masculinity and the view on literature in general is changing. And I'm very glad, because I was not writing these poems to change anything. I was not aware of this while I was writing the poems. I was writing poems for my daughter because I love her, and because that's what sparked the poems at the moment. It was after the poems were written when I started doing this research, and I realized that somehow this book is rare. I hope that it will not be that rare in the future, because more fathers will talk about their fatherhood in good and bad and in different ways. But right now, I think that is one of very few books where a male artist is talking joyously about the experience of being a father, which is a transformative experience in every regard. It changed me as a poet, it changed me as a human being, it changed me as a human in general.
How wonderful it is for you to be able to speak to both the English-speaking and Spanish-speaking communities. What do you like about having both?
Well, that has been a big change that also has to do, it was simultaneous with the birth of my daughter. Even though I've been in the United States for 15 years, and even though I know that this is my definite house, even though I know that I might die here, that is not my plan, but it might happen. I was writing only in Spanish and publishing only outside of the United States for a very long time. It was in 2018 when I published my first bilingual book. It was that same year when my daughter was born, and it was that same year that I was named Poet Laureate of the City of Cincinnati. That year is the most transformational, is the most definitive and definitory year of my life. After that year, because my daughter was born here, because her language might be the one that I'm speaking in right now, even though she's bilingual now, I was very interested in not being a foreigner in her world. And as I've said before, I like to embrace my present, and my present life is here. And I have good friends in Cincinnati. I have a lot of poets friends that only speak English. Many of these friends believed me that I was a poet, but they didn't have any proof. So at some point, I had the need of being able to be in both languages and in both communities, because I live here and I didn't want to all my life have this dislocated world where I am only a poet after I take a plane and I go somewhere else. So I decided to start translating my own work with the help of friends. And now translating my work has become part of my editing process. When I am translating sometimes from Spanish to English, I like better what is happening in English, and I go back and I change the original. So now the translation is part of the writing itself. I think that I have the great privilege of being able to talk to both, in both languages, to many communities. And this has allowed me to feel more at home here. I feel less foreign when I am inhabiting the house of poetry. And that is the door that doing this opened for me. This book, for example, is being published at the same time in Mexico and here. In Mexico with a printing house called Cuadrivio, only in Spanish. And here in the United States, this bilingual edition with Dos Madres Press. In that, I don't know if that is the way that I'm going to publish the rest of my books, but that for me was a dream, was an ambition, because I do want to see my work in both places at the same time, because somehow I do feel that I live in both places at the same time as a poet. As a person, as a father, I'm full-time Cincinnati. I'm here. And then I take vacations to Mexico. But as a poet, my preoccupations, my language, my first language when I write, my tradition, the way that I understand myself, even though it has been changing little by little, it is still in both places at the same time. So I am very happy. Also, and I have to say, I am very thankful. I am very thankful because Cincinnati is not a city that is full as other cities in Texas or Arizona or California, where you see the Hispanic community being most of the city or something like that. Here, having a Hispanic poet laureate meant something from the city. I felt welcome like I never felt before. I felt that poetry was valued in a way that I never saw it before, because it is not only a poet, but a poet in translation. It is a poet that when reads in English, reads with an accent. It is a poet that does not look physically like what we are used to see as the poets of Cincinnati. This has been one of the greatest honors of my life. And it was also a testament of how different things can be at the same time, because this happened in a time in 2018 where the political arena in the United States was highly anti-Hispanic. There was a rhetoric against Hispanic people and against their language. And being able to be a poet unapologetically in Spanish was also, for me, a political stand. Even if I wasn't talking about politics in the poems, being what you are proudly was enough of a protest sometimes. So this being in these two worlds have changed me. There is one thing. I was invited to Macedonia to read poems 2 years ago. And there were 4 American poets invited there. Me, a poet, Tanya Kohong from Korea, Korean American, born in Korea. Poet from Jordan, and the one born and raised American poet is living now in Romania, Taras Turcu. So all of us were immigrants, including the American poet. We met each other there in Macedonia. We started talking, and one time we got to a restaurant where everybody else was. And when they saw us walking in, and this is a guy looking Middle Eastern, me, the clearly Korean woman, and this blonde, tall American. When they saw all of us, they said, "Here comes the Americans." And I look at my friends and I said, this is the first time that someone says the word American to refer to me when they see me getting to a place. But they were right. We were all. And this is the one country in the world where you can say that. All of these people are Americans. And I am proud to live in a country that is like that. Despite all of the awfulness that was heard so much over the last years. Because that is, if that is true, this is also true. Reality is never just one. And I have heard many saddening things in my life here. But I also have found love and friendship and hope here. And everything is there.
You say that in Spanish now?